Hi there, welcome to the archives. So today I thought I would share a book I read over the weekend. It's called Mothering the Mother, African American Postpartum Traditions, Recipes, and Healing. And it's written by Shafia Monroe. There's a foreword by Erykah Badu. And it's made me, as somebody who is in her 40s, who hasn't had a child yet, who waited on purpose, like I said in the video yesterday when I was talking about love and basketball, I always knew just from my own lived experience that if I ever wanted to be a mother, I really wanted to be ready to be a mother. I didn't ever want to resent my children because I didn't get to do things that I wanted to do. I've seen, how do I say this? I've experienced and seen and know folks who've experienced parents who, even if it's jokingly, right, would, especially in frustration or anger or certain emotions parents feel for their kids when they're just like at their limit. Oh, I could have done this if I hadn't had you, and do you know what I sacrificed for you? And I feel that, like I understand that parents, especially mothers, sacrifice a lot. I wanted to throw that in my child's face or my children's face, right? I always wanted to travel. I wanted to go to school. And I think until I did some of those things, until I lived, I didn't want to bring a child into this world and then throw those experiences in their face, right? Furthermore, I always knew I didn't want to have a child until I was financially ready, whatever that looks like. And is anybody ever financially ready? I don't know. Maybe that's just fear talking. But I always, especially in my 20s, I was like, I'm not ready to have a child right now. My 20s are for saving up, hustling, grinding, saving up money so that when I do have children, I am financially independent in some sort of a way. Just because in my reality, I've never really known men to be providers per se, in that, oh, come to me if you need something. My experience was you come to them and they don't have it, right? They've never had $1 a day in their life to give you, so then you end up going back to the women to ask them for support. So I knew very early that I could not, or I thought, maybe not I knew, I'm trying to think of, the book is making me think about reframing my language. I never thought that I could depend on a man, right? So it's really interesting, this narrative now, when we're seeing like men being like, we're providers and let us control, and I didn't see many examples. I just pulled out some books of men on my bookshelf that I respect, that I'm going to do in one of my next episodes as we move out of Women's History Month. I wanted to share some resources and books from men that I respect, that I read up on. I think other folks should look at. I'll say that they're not there. It's just, it was limited in my orbit, right? Or at least for me, because every other people in my orbit might have different experiences. And so I chose to wait. And then in my 30s, it didn't feel like something that was possible, or working through a lot of like my own trauma and my own self-sabotage and really distancing myself from dating and all of that. And so I didn't have sex at all in my 30s. And now I'm in my 40s. And now I still don't even feel ready, right? Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, I think I'm more prepared to be a mother, but financially, I'm not. And again, for me, maybe this is fear, but I never wanted to be a parent until I was ready. I don't know what that actually looks like. I think for me, it's having some money in the bank, knowing that I could afford diapers, and also that I have community care, which this book really emphasized, right? It takes a village. I grew up thinking it takes a village. I was born literally across the street from my grandparents' home, where my mom and her siblings grew up at some point. And so I came home to a grandfather and a grandmother, and some of my mom's siblings. Obviously, some of them were abroad doing school, but I love that. I really love that. When my parents needed to travel abroad, I had an auntie who I knew I can go to, and that community. I want that for my child, right? I always saw myself spending at least the early years of my children's life back home. I want my children to have that experience of what it's like to grow up in Ghana, in the heat and with community, right? With friends and family and cousins. That was always a vision I had. And I don't have that right now, right? And so thinking about, I love that she's here today. I love that I'm doing this topic and she is just here to support me. Honestly, cats are something. Thank you, Mama. So this book, All to Say, is really making me think again, which I have been doing since I entered my 40s, about motherhood and if it's something that's viable. I've gone to the fertility clinic to see whether it's even something that's viable, and at this point it would only be viable, quote unquote, the natural way. IVF is not an option for me. One of my tubes, I found out, is tied, right? And again, not to like throw all my personal information out there in TMI, but I think it's important for those of us that have waited to hear what it looks like, right? Because society will tell you, don't wait. And this book kind of does it as well too, right? Motherhood is the best and the most miraculous and beautiful, and it is. I do believe that it is. And so if you're somebody who thinks that if you want to be a mother, if you think it's a beautiful experience, this is definitely be a book for you, right? If you don't want to be a mother, if you don't think it's a miraculous, beautiful experience for women, then it might not be the book for you. But for me, I found it gave me some hope. It also made me really sad that we've lost a lot of these traditions. When I was in elementary school, even going up to high school, I remember when people in my community had babies, my mom would go and be part of their postpartum process, right? The olive oil. I grew up seeing, especially with the umbilical cord and helping it fall off and using a Q-tip to clean the umbilical cord and being there for the mother and cooking for her. And I always wanted that. I always wanted that community. A lot in our community, mothers do show up for their daughters when they have children. That's not always an experience. I was talking to one of my aunties who didn't have that experience, and she did it alone, right? I know cousins who did it alone. And I personally never wanted that. I would rather not. Maybe that's not a good mentality to have, but I just feel like my children deserve so much better than I had. And if they can't, then what is the point, right? And so this made me really realize that like we have as a Black diaspora community lost certain things, and that's also capitalism, that's migration, that's trauma. Folks have to work, right? I think in America it's even worse. At least here in Canada, we're used to like a year of maternity leave. I think in America it's like 6 weeks or something ridiculous like that. So there's not even value for that process. I hate that, which is why I wanted to go home after I had a child, at least for the first couple years, right? I still don't feel financially independent at 41 years old for so many different reasons, right? And I think that's a lot of why a lot of us are not having children. Financially, it does not make sense to have a child. It feels selfish in this day and age to bring a child into this world when you cannot take care of them how you need to, right? For me, at least, those are some of the reasons why I waited. So reading this book, it did two things for me. It validated, first of all, how beautiful the mothering experience is and how beautiful the postpartum experience can be, right? She talks about granny midwives and the history of granny midwives, some of the different old ways, right? I grew up with, people who shaped the child's heads, and that's across a lot of different cultures. I remember as a young girl when somebody would have a baby in the community, my mom would always be there to help them with the postpartum. I remember her using a Q-tip to, clean the umbilical cord with warm olive oil, those kinds of things, right? Making sure the beads, having beads on the children, our waist, our hands, our feet, all of those different traditions I've seen, and I wanted that, right? I would love for my mother and my aunties to be there. I think that younger version of me was too idealistic, right? That was a time when I thought my family was perfect and community was everything, And life teaches you that some people that you think will be there forever are not going to be there forever, right? And so I'm glad I didn't have a child, because I don't think I would have had that necessary support that I needed, especially with migration. A lot of our mothers are not there. I was talking to somebody recently who, her mother was not there for her when she had a child, and she was telling me some of those struggles and stuff, right? I've had aunties tell me the same thing, and I just never wanted that. I knew I never wanted that. I don't want to struggle with a child. If I'm to struggle on this life, I would rather do it alone. I don't want to have to struggle with a child. And I'm sure that just having a child in itself is a struggle, but American cultures raise children that is so void of community, and the irony that I'm totally isolated right now, right? So it's very ironic that I'm saying this. That was part of why I waited. And it was good to read this, to be like, yes, people still value this, right? There are women who still show up to cook for new mothers and new parents, rubbing their feet. I think nowadays it would be like, oh, she's spoiled. She wanted me to cook for her when she had a baby. I know, but me rubbing it back. And my masseuse. And it's just like, there's so much. There's less patience, I find, for women in general, especially mothers, that I just like, I don't want to do it alone, and I don't want to do it if I'm not spoiled. Does that make sense? And I don't think I don't think it's spoiled at all. I think it was a traditional ways. I read this book and I'm like, this is what I want. This is exactly what I want. How do we retain some of these indigenous traditions that were lost? I didn't really get that, right? Because again, in our culture, or at least in my lineage and where we are right now, these old ways are seen as demonic. They're seen as witchcraft. Why would you take a child into the woods? Why would you teach a girl how to fish? Why are you sending her out into nature? Don't you know nature is where the demons are? Demonic, witchcraft, all of these things. It's like we've been so indoctrinated that like I really don't even want to have a child in this climate, because the ecosystem is so whitewashed, is so, I want my children to know the old ways. I want my children to be proud of their African heritage. I don't want them thinking we were primitive. And have a child, I want to be in a birthing center. I want to be back home on my traditional lands, in a tub, birthing at home. And nowadays, all of that sounds too idealistic, too utopic. Get over that. That's not how it is. That's not even safe. That's not medical. You're going to die. Right? And there are chances that you will die. And so this book, all to say, is if you're interested in some of the old ways, right? Some of the traditions, heat, it is a little bit, there is a lot of repetition. And I tend to write the same way. People complain about, you're saying the same thing, is redundant. If you're that type of like an academic mind, if you're from that Western white kind of academic mind, you're probably not going to like this book. If you think like Western science is the only right science, you're not going to like this book, right? If you think indigenous knowledge is not science, if you think we didn't know our way, what we were doing before the white man came, you're not going to like this book. So there is a lot of repetition, which I found helpful because it helped me to remember it. Hydration, warmth, okay, community, okay, teas, baths, like the repetition helped me to remember a lot of this information. And so I like repetition sometimes, and I found it helpful. But if you don't, just don't read it, because I don't want you reading it and be like, oh my God, this book this is not even scientifically correct, and you know. And so, yeah, that's basically, it goes through traditions, recipes. Let's talk about the recipes. If I wrote a book, this is for the Black Americans right now. If me as an African Canadian, if I wrote a book and I was including gumbo as a recipe to teach people, you guys would not be happy about that. You already accused me of culture vulture and she's appropriation, and she's stealing this, and this is not hers to talk. I humbly ask you, not that why are you sharing African dishes, because that's the whole point, but like celery and inkatenkwai. Why are you telling the world, Miss Shafia, we don't put celery in, I didn't grow up putting celery in inkatenkwai. palm nut soup or groundnut soup, those soups are meant to be hearty, like meat and fish. If you do veer off, you're getting like mushrooms, right? You could use shiitake mushrooms. You could put mushroom in soup. But celery, I don't know about that one. Maybe it tastes good, but like stuff like that, I was just, it just, as an African, I was just like, oh, no. But again, if you like it, I love it, right? Also, like palm nut and okra, I didn't grow up with that. It's one or the other. You either eat okra soup, and that's with banku, or you eat palm nut soup, and usually that's with fufu. And so to see palm nut and okra together, I was like, oh wow. There's a lot going on here. So some of the recipes I did side-eye as an it's the African recipes I side-eyed. The rest I took pictures and I'm happy to try. Herbal recommendations, teas to drink, that kind of stuff. Massages, belly wrapping, and so cleansing, ritual, skin to skin, pelvic steaming, the importance of rest, the importance of circling the house. I had somebody in my family was telling me that they did bury their placenta, but they wish they hadn't because again it's demonic and all that kind of stuff. And I realized reading this that they also hadn't done the right process, right? The woman is not supposed to bury the placenta, where in this case I think she was the one who buried it. You're supposed to have somebody else bury the placenta, and then after 42 days or whatever, when you're ready to leave after the laying in, then your partner or somebody can take you to where they buried it. There's a whole ritual. So this person had missed all of that ritual and didn't do it properly, and now is complaining that she wished she had never done it because it took the child's soul and blah 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 blah, right? But we didn't do it right because nobody taught us how to do that. Nobody taught us in our family that you don't do that. You don't bury a placenta. You don't eat a placenta. They say it's cannibalism is what I heard recently. Again, this book says we don't eat it. It's a Western thing. But there's just a lot that I learned about it. It went into the mortality rates, right? It talked about racism in the medical system and how that increases. It talked about granny midwives and the history and the respect that granny midwives had before. About how within the training for midwives, there's a lot of emphasis on other cultures, like Mexican postpartum traditions, Chinese medicine with acupuncture, placental medicine, mother roasting, Japanese ensei, Swedish postpartum visiting, East Indian postpartum massages, and how the Black community often was not really emphasized. And so, yeah, if you're interested in being a mother and becoming a mother, if you're interested in supporting a mother, there's a prayer for fathers, new fathers in here. It also talks about including fathers as well too. Stuff is not very like queer friendly. There's no mention of same-sex anything. And so it's very heterosexual context. Again, Erykah Badu did the foreword. So you kind of get an idea of like, you know, the spiritual woo-woo girls. So anyways, that's all. For those mothers who waited to have kids in their 30s and their 40s, are you glad you waited? Do you wish you'd done it earlier? Do the mothers who had children early, do you wish you had waited? Were you ready to have kids? Even if you weren't ready, like the teen moms who weren't ready, was it still so worth it, right? Because I think that's my challenge, is I just feel like I don't know if it would be worth it. Even out of the cats, she's probably the one that challenges me the most because she's the most like me, very stubborn, very toddler phase. And I'm just like, there's moments where I'm like, I'm arguing with a cat. Now I have to do this with a child, a toddler. And you're violating my boundaries. I said no and you're still doing it. So those are some of the things I'm still working on, right? I think healing a lot of my own childhood wounds has been helpful. Processing right now I'm trying to work on a lot of forgiveness. All of those emotional parts I think would be necessary, but I didn't think I was mature enough. And I think a lot of you guys are being honest, a lot of you were not mature enough to have kids, right? But you didn't care that you were mature enough because you were taking that next step in society. And so as long as society thought that you were right on time, you weren't delayed, I still have more maturing to do, right? I want to be more mature when I have a child and or a family. So until next time, in solidarity.